Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. Let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. In the Delhi edition of the Hindu, we have a number of important articles today. I have chosen a total of 13 articles for a detailed and comprehensive analysis so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. Now, before we start, I have a couple of important announcements. From this week, Unacademy would be presenting few special classes, which is absolutely free for all of you to attend on the Unacademy app. Tonight at 8 p.m. on the 14th of October, I will be taking a special class on Pakistan's terror factories and the threat posed by Pakistan's state sponsored terrorism. A very important static topic under internal security, and we will include a detailed discussion, including the current affairs. Tomorrow, a history session would be taken up by Abhishek Mishra sir on 15th October at 2 p.m. on UNESCO's Intangible Heritage Sites of India. So please ensure you attend these sessions on the Unacademy app, and these are absolutely free. Those interested, click on the link provided in the video description. And if you're looking to enroll for our online program, you need to avail the Diwali offer. The Diwali discount is here, the much awaited offer. You can enroll for a 12-month subscription at one of the lowest prices ever. This price is unlikely to return. So at 17,999, you stand a chance to get up to 12 months of subscription. Those interested, click on the link in the description and enter the code IAS English. If you want the PDF of this session, please scan the QR code and join our official Telegram channel. After the session ends, the PDF would be shared over here. Now let's get started and look at the first article. On page number 6, there's a detailed editorial that evaluates the impact of the proposed Sawalkote hydropower project, which has been recently approved by the government of India. I hope you're familiar with this development. Recently, the government has pushed the Sawalkote hydropower project, which is proposed to come up on the Chenab River, which is part of the Indus River system. Now, this proposed project raises important questions about environmental and social implications of the project versus national security and strategic considerations. So, this is a great article for us to understand the debate between national security and strategic considerations on one side and environmental and social consequences on the other side. If you guys remember, yesterday also we had a similar discussion with regard to the Great Nicobar project. So, this can be another topic, another example that you can add to this debate. The editorial is of the view that national security consideration will be reinforced when the environmental and social impact of these large public projects is kept in mind. Meaning, you can't see them as two opposing debates. To enhance our national security strategic objectives, we need to keep in mind the environmental social consequences of any such large project, which could affect the local population and the environment and ecology of the local region. Now, let's break down this topic. Let's understand why there is a security and strategic dimension for the proposed Sawalkote hydropower project on the Chenab River. See, this is directly related to the Indus Water Treaty between India and Pakistan. The Chenab River, which is part of the Indus drainage basin, is one of the major rivers in the Indus basin. And the sharing of these waters was dictated by a treaty that was signed in 1960, which was mediated by the World Bank. And this provided for a successful sharing of waters between India and Pakistan, despite decades of wars and hostilities and conflict. Recently, as you know, India has announced a unilateral suspension of its commitments under the Indus Water Treaty after the Pahalgam terror attack. Following the brutal Pahalgam terror attack, India has essentially withdrawn its commitments, stating that India is pausing its commitments under the treaty, and unilaterally we have suspended following the commitments under the treaty. So, since then, India has been pushing to fully utilize the waters of the Indus, including that of the western rivers. Because, as per the Indus Water Treaty, the drainage basin of the Indus was divided into western and eastern rivers. The treaty essentially divides the entire drainage basin into the western and eastern rivers. The western rivers, which includes the Indus, Jhelum, and Chenab, they have been largely allocated to Pakistan. India has very limited usage rights over the western rivers. Please make a note of this. India can't store the waters of the western rivers. We can't divert these waters. We can only consume the limited allocation provided to India and ensure that rest of the water flows into Pakistan without any hindrance. So most of the share of the waters of western rivers is allocated to Pakistan, with limited usage rights being given to India. However, India can build run of the river projects where the water is not stored or diverted, where the water is held temporarily, especially to generate hydropower. Such run of the river projects are allowed on the western rivers, and India has built few such projects in the past. As long as India is not storing the water permanently or diverting the water or exceeding its allotted share, these run of the river projects are allowed, provided if India shares the data, the hydrological data, transparently with Pakistan. So, under the treaty, there is a permanent Indus Commission under which the Indus water commissioners of both India and Pakistan would meet every year and exchange hydrological data. India also had an obligation to allow Pakistani officials to visit these sites and keep a check on India's construction activities on the upstream part of the western rivers. These obligations were placed on India under the treaty, as India is part of the upstream of this river. India is the upper riparian, whereas Pakistan is at a disadvantage as it is a downstream country, as a lower riparian state. So India had remained firmly committed to this treaty for decades, as India never wanted to weaponize water. Water is about basic survival, it's a basic human necessity. India never wanted to bring this into geopolitics and use this as a tool against Pakistan. Despite repeated provocations, India had remained firmly committed to the treaty, and we had never ever overutilized our share over the western rivers. India had never blocked the flow of the waters or diverted or stored the waters of the western rivers. The eastern rivers on the other side, Ravi, Bias, and Satluj, they have been largely allocated to India. Here, India is free to utilize these waters for all the purposes that are required, from irrigation to drinking water to hydropower generation to industrial activity. And after utilizing most of the share of the eastern rivers, the rest would be allowed to flow into Pakistan. So overall, cumulatively, if you look at the water share allocation, it was roughly 80-20 allocation, with 80% being assigned to Pakistan with regard to the western rivers, and India getting a cumulative share of around 20%. So this was seen as a fair arrangement which would satisfy the requirements of both countries. Though it seemed that India was doing a favor to Pakistan, India remained committed as it wanted to respect international law. India wanted to be seen as a responsible power which would not weaponize water. But following recent terror incidents, especially after the Uri attack and the Pulwama attack, there has been a lot of internal discussion in India within our strategic establishment to examine whether India can use Indus Water Treaty to punish Pakistan. But previously, a call was made by the Modi government to not weaponize the treaty and to stay committed to the provisions of the treaty. Because this is not just about India Pakistan and using this as a leverage against Pakistan. This is also about India's global standing. This is also about India's commitment to a rules based order and upholding international laws and international commitment. Because don't forget, India is also a lower riparian when it comes to few rivers, such as the Brahmaputra, where China is the upper riparian. If India were to, let's say, break the treaty commitments, then imagine what China could possibly do where there is no treaty at all, there's no water sharing arrangement between India and China, then if India were to raise a voice at the global level, accusing China of misusing its upper riparian advantages, then India may not get enough global support. So, keeping this in mind, India had always remained committed to the terms of the Indus Water Treaty. But after the Pahalgam attack, a decision has been taken by the government to unilaterally suspend the commitments. So, following this, India has scaled up its efforts to utilize the waters, particularly of the western rivers. See, anyways, we had effectively utilized waters of the eastern rivers, Ravi, Bias, and Satluj. They are the lifeline for the northwestern parts of India, particularly Punjab, Haryana, and the region around it, the agrarian belt, is heavily dependent on the waters of eastern rivers. India has built sufficient dams on Ravi, Bias, and Satluj. But when it comes to western rivers, India had not even utilized the allotted share. Forget violating the treaty or breaching the treaty. We had underutilized the allotted share itself. So now India is gradually stepping up its plans. We have carried out desilting of these dams to increase the storage capacity. India has taken up new plans and new projects are being proposed to fully utilize the waters and maybe even hold the water back from Pakistan. Now look at the map here. On the Indus and Jhelum, we already have existing dams. For example, in the Ladakh sector on the Indus, we have the Nimu Basgo Dam project, which is a hydropower project, a run of the river project. Then on the Jhelum, in the Kashmir sector, we have the famous Kishan Ganga project and the Uri project, both of which are run of the river hydropower projects. So these dams that you see on Indus and Jhelum, they are perfectly in line with the terms of the Indus Water Treaty. Then when you come to the Chenab, on the Chenab as well, India already has three major hydropower dams. We have Dulhasti, Paglihar, and the Salal hydropower projects. So these are the three existing ones. Then we also have Ratle, an upcoming hydropower project. And upon this, a new proposed dam has been approved by the government. Approximately the site of this project would be here. The Sawalkote hydro project would come up in the Riasi district. And this has raised concerns, environmental and social concerns. On one hand, India is justifying these projects, stating that it would essentially help India to fully utilize the waters and achieve strategic objectives and even national security objectives vis-a-vis Pakistan. This could potentially help India leverage the Indus waters, use the waters and the flow of the waters to punish Pakistan. But the question the article is raising is that, are we keeping in mind the environmental and social consequences? Because eventually, any environmental social impact will have a national security implication. The two are connected, they're tied together. Instead of looking at them as opposing debates, which are present on the opposite sides of the argument, you need to understand that one reinforces the other. You can never ensure complete national security by ignoring environmental and social considerations. Because if you look at the Sawalkot Idle project, which is being pushed by the Ministry of Power, the Ministry of Home Affairs, they are pushing this as a strategic project. It is slated to be a 1.8 gigawatt project, which will help generate significant hydropower, a relatively clean and renewable form of energy. But the problem is, when you build such consecutive dams, a series of cascading dams on these Himalayan rivers, this could lead to several environmental complications. See, first of all, the ecology of the Himalayas is very vulnerable. I'm sure all of you are aware that the Himalayas are young fold mountains, tectonically very active, located in a seismically active zone where the Indian plate is subducting under the Eurasian plate. So this makes Himalayas very, very vulnerable to several disasters, from earthquakes to landslides to avalanches and even GLOF events, glacial lake outburst flood events. The region is also vulnerable to cloudbursts and flash floods. So the region is highly disaster prone. And upon this, Human exploitation, human activities has already caused a lot of deforestation. It has affected the stability of the slope, which makes the region even more vulnerable to such deadly disasters. So imagine constructing large public projects such as hydropower dams in such a delicate, sensitive region, and the two building multiple projects, one after the other in a cascading format. Now, don't you think when so many dams are built in a short distance of each other on the same river, this could lead to silt accumulation? The silt deposition at each dam site can compound, leading to unsustainable levels of silt deposition, which could threaten the very safety and integrity of the dam structure. This could even threaten slope stability, which could even trigger landslides. So, this remains a major concern which could affect the local population. The Himalayas is already affected by multiple disasters from Uttarakhand to Jammu and Kashmir to Himachal Pradesh to Ladakh. And these projects will add to the environmental burden, the ecological burden. It could contribute to extensive deforestation. The initial estimates are indicating that for Sawalkote hydro project, 800 to 900 hectares of forest land will have to be cleared, which will lead to significant deforestation, which could weaken the stability of the slope and contribute to more landslides. Estimates indicate 1,500 people and families will have to be displaced because of the proposed project. This is the social impact of the project. Multiple villages will have to be completely evicted and displaced, and they will have to be rehabilitated in a different region. Because the Sawalkote hydro project, though the government is saying it's a run of the river project, meaning it will not store water. But if you look at the plan, the water storage capacity here would be around 50,000 crore liters. So, for functional purposes, it's as good as a storage dam. Though it's meant for hydropower generation, it's meant to be a run of the river project. The quantum of water it will store will functionally make it a storage dam. So this will result in a lot of submergence behind the dam. The backwaters will submerge the nearby areas. Multiple villages will undergo submergence, leading to the displacement of thousands of families and villages. So compensating the villagers, taking care of the social consequences, the environmental consequences, and the cost of construction will make this project extremely costly. The cost of the project has already shot up because this project was proposed many years ago. So subsequent delays has led to increase in the raw material cost, and these added costs would further increase the overall expenditure on the project. So the editorial is asking this question: is it worth investing so heavily in these projects? Are we blinded by the national security and strategic objectives? Are we ignoring the environmental social concerns? Shouldn't environmental social concerns define our national security interests? Aren't they connected with each other? These are the key questions being raised by this editorial. The editorial supports the government in building these public projects, but it's important to keep in mind the impact, the consequences, and factor in these considerations as well. So that is the key takeaway from this article. So please take up this practice question. National security and ecological responsibility, they reinforce each other, meaning they are mutually dependent. National security can be guaranteed when ecological responsibility is promoted. Because if you're not responsible ecologically, if you don't promote sustainable development, this will affect the local population, it will affect the local conditions, which in turn hampers your national security objectives. Now imagine if the people who are displaced here, if they're not compensated, if they're not rehabilitated, don't you think they'll have a resentment against the government? They'll have a grievance which is not addressed. They feel injustice has been done to them. What if the local population is exploited by extremists or by hostile powers from the outside of the country? This in turn would obviously threaten our national security. So both of them, they reinforce each other. That is the statement which has been given. Evaluate the statement in the context of India's planned hydro projects in the Indus River Basin. So you can start your answer with an introduction on the concept of ecological responsibility and sustainable development, how this should be a factor in national security. Generally, these are seen as conflicting objectives, right? That's the concept you can explain. Usually, they are seen as uh, factors present on the opposing ends of a debate. But it's important to see ecological responsibility, sustainable development integral to the objectives of national security and our strategic interests. So, present this concept at the beginning. Then, in the body, you can talk about the Indus rivers, Indus Water Treaty, and the hydro projects of India. If possible, you can draw a rough map highlighting the Indus Basin, the division into western eastern rivers by the Indus Water Treaty. And you can even depict the various hydro projects of India on the Indus, Jhelum, and Chenab, and the upcoming projects as well, like Ratle, Sawalkote, and the others. Then talk about the environmental social impact of these projects, how this in turn could affect the security and strategic objectives of the country. To clearly establish this connection and present a way forward after this. Suggest what can be done to strike a balance between our security strategic objectives and environmental and social considerations. So, sustainable development is the only way forward. Ensuring ecological responsibility, sustainable development is integral to our overall national interests. So, you have to suggest the balanced approach the government should be taking and then conclude your answer. In the conclusion, you can say that such public projects are needed for growth and development, especially in remote areas, in border regions. Such large projects are beneficial for growth and development and for integration of those regions into the sovereignty of the nation. At the same time, highlight the risks that are present, that any missteps which could lead to long term ecological consequences, increased disaster vulnerability, could affect the local population, and this could in turn have security implications. So, this has to be your conclusion, like a warning note, a caution, and why the balanced path has to be taken by the government when it comes to such large public projects. So, I hope the topic is clear. Now, let's look at another interesting article related to social issues, social justice, and polity. This article deals with a very sensitive topic. It deals with caste based discrimination and caste based violence, which is widely prevalent in our country. Now, this topic and discussion might trigger some of you, right? Some of you may not agree with what I'm discussing, but let's focus on this topic and let's try to have an unbiased discussion on this important development. This article is based on the recent NCRB report, the NCRB data for 2023. The National Crime Records Bureau under the Home Ministry, which keeps a database of the crimes being reported in the country and categorizes those crimes. Remember, we discussed the NCRB data as well in one of the previous sessions. So, as per the NCRB data, cases against scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, they have increased. Around 57,000 plus cases have been registered against scheduled caste population of the country. So this is a nominal increase of maybe 0.4% with regard to cases filed in 2022. And you compare that with cases filed in 2023, there is a slight jump in cases against scheduled castes. With regard to scheduled tribes, 12 to 13,000 cases have been registered, which is a significant jump of 28% compared to 2022 data. In 2022, around 10,000 odd cases were registered against scheduled tribes. Now the cases have jumped in 2023 by 28%, almost up to 12,900 cases. So these rise in cases against SC/ST population is a clear reflection of the continuation of caste-based discrimination and caste-based violence in our society. See, the Constitution of India guarantees the right to equality under Article 14. Under Article 15, the Constitution prohibits discrimination on the grounds of religion, caste, sex, place of birth, etc. It even provides for affirmative action, the policy of quotas or reservation for socially, educationally backward communities, including the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. Article 16, that deals with public employment, equality in public employment, also includes the provision of affirmative action to reserve government jobs for the backward classes, for communities such as SCs and STs, which have been historically oppressed in India's caste based society. Under the, under the Varna system and the Brahminical hierarchy, which has dominated the Indian civilization, centuries of discrimination, oppression, and violence has been seen against the lower caste, particularly against the Dalits and the tribal communities. So, to uplift these communities in a democratic India, our founding fathers, our constitution makers, envisioned a egalitarian constitution with these egalitarian values and principles. Under Article 17, the horrific practice of untouchability was prohibited. Untouchability was explicitly prohibited. So the vision of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the vision of Mahatma Gandhi, the vision of Mahatma Phule, the vision of Periyar, these were the champions of a caste-free society, a discrimination-free society. They ensured such values were imbibed into our constitution with explicit rights guaranteed to all the people in the country. But despite these guarantees, despite sufficient legal regulations being in place, still caste based violence and discrimination continues blatantly in our country. I know some of you may disagree with this. You might say that this does not exist anymore in our country. But let me show you some examples just from the last few days. This is something which should horrify every Indian citizen. This is something which should make our heads hang in shame because no modern civilization, no civilized society can tolerate such atrocities. Recently, there was a unbelievable horrific incident in Madhya Pradesh. The incident has gone viral on social media as well. You might be aware of this. Apparently, an individual from a backward community, from an OBC community, had insulted someone from the upper caste. And you know what the local villagers did? The individual from the backward community, he was made to wash the feet of the upper caste individual and drink that water. On the other hand, in Haryana, right? Forget the poor sections and the lower sections of the society. In Haryana, an IPS officer from the Dalit community has committed suicide. He shot himself and he has left behind a suicide note accusing his superiors of caste based discrimination. Because IPS Puran Kumar, a senior IPS officer in the Haryana cadre, was known to raise his voice regularly against caste bias and caste discrimination within the higher bureaucracy. So, this is not just a problem affecting the poor sections, the rural areas, and the backward communities. This is something that can be seen in the higher echelons of the government, within the administration, within the bureaucracy as well. So, right now, investigations have begun to examine whether these allegations are true, whether senior IPS officials did they discriminate against the IPS officer in concern, which led to his suicide. There are many such tragic incidents which keep on unfolding. For example, just the other day, there was another tragic story from Tamil Nadu, a case of honor killing because of an intercaste marriage. So these are issues which continue to persist in our country. Right? You can choose to ignore it, but the ground reality is that caste-based discrimination and even caste-based violence is a ground reality in our nation. It's not just restricted to rural pockets and the backward regions, it's present even in the urban areas as well. There are many instances where people from upper caste who own houses, they don't let out their houses for rent for those from the Dalit community and the lower caste. There are places where people from lower castes find it difficult to get jobs. They're denied employment because of their caste, or they're denied promotions, or the workplace becomes very toxic for someone from a lower caste as they face constant harassment and discrimination from the upper caste colleagues. You see this in colleges, in schools, where students have been pushed to commit suicide because of caste based harassment and discrimination and violence. So it is this sensitive issue that the writer is exploring. That our country has unfortunately not really progressed, it has not really moved forward, despite having the foundational values rooted in equality, which was championed by the then reformers like Periyar, Ambedkar, Mahatma Gandhi, Mahatma Phule, and the others. Now, recently, for example, you might have seen few films that deal with the caste topic. They have generated a lot of backlash. There was a Hindi film on Phule, Mahatma Phule, who carried out legendary work in the field of uplifting the lower castes. This triggered a huge backlash from the upper castes. They didn't want the movie to be released. There are other popular movies like Dadak 2 and the others, which also explore the same themes of caste discrimination. They have faced a lot of criticism and backlash from the upper caste, from the elite and the privileged classes. Now you see this playing out in our politics, where the Dalit population, the tribals, they have essentially become a vote bank for all our political parties. There are a set of political parties which capitalize on Dalit votes and tribal votes, right? I'm not going to name which parties they are. They don't genuinely care about their upliftment or development. They just try to amplify their voice, stand for their concerns. While it gives them political representation, eventually these parties are perpetuating the cycle. Then you have another set of parties. Let's call them set A and set B. Another set of parties which largely stand for the privileged classes, and they would never provide for equal treatment for the lower castes. Though they claim to champion the voice of the underprivileged, they essentially want to retain a monolithic, homogeneous religious identity. In the name of Hindu religion, they want to unify the caste, but they genuinely do not care about the lower caste and the underprivileged. They want the distinction, the hierarchies to remain. So we have different sets of political parties in our country which benefit from caste based politics. You need to accept the reality that at the grassroots level, voting even today in most parts of the country takes place on the lines of caste. We even have a dedicated law to address the atrocities against these communities. The SC/ST Prevention of Atrocities Act. There is a dedicated piece of legislation enacted by the Parliament in 1989 to provide for strict punishments to those who engage in caste based discrimination and violence to protect the SC/ST community. But despite the law, the enforcement has been very lax. Now, if you look at the current number of cases which are pending, more than 60% of the cases are pending in courts. What does this tell you? It tells you that there is an inherent bias within the administration, within the judiciary. You look at the police, you look at the bureaucracy in general, look at the judiciary as well. They are still dominated by the upper caste. The data clearly shows that, despite decades of reservation and affirmative action, which has largely been misused by political parties for vote bank politics, lower class communities, SCs, STs, even today are inadequately represented in government services, in key administrative positions. In police forces, in bureaucracy, in the administration, in the judiciary, there is an inherent bias when it comes to cases related to SC/ST community. And the pendency shows the inefficiency of the administration, the police force, and the judiciary. More than 60% of the cases are still pending trial. So, this is what raises serious concerns regarding the social fabric of India, the principles of equity and equality. So, the writer is suggesting that it is high time for the nation to come together to erase the caste based distinctions and move forward. As Ambedkar said, caste is basically it's a shackle which is holding back the country and it has to be broken. You have to shatter the caste based divisions which are present in the country. You can't approach this with a reform mindset. You need to break these shackles. Back in 1970s, there was a very popular movement, the Dalit Panthers. They were influenced by the American Black Panthers. They would basically carry out protests in the streets, hold rallies, and even take direct action, right, to raise the voice of the Dalit community. It was modeled on the American Black Panthers, where a similar uh, activist organization came up in the US in the 60s to stand for the rights of the black community in the United States. On the same lines, the Dalit Panthers made a mark for themselves in the 1970s in India. The political representation for SC/ST community has improved, but the underlying issues and causes are still present. The lack of access to education, healthcare, housing, employment opportunities, they still affect the SC/ST communities. And even within the SC/ST communities, there are few sections which have more benefited from the policy of reservation. So you have a section of elites within the SC/ST community. Within OBCs, there are a set of elites for cornering all the benefits of reservation thanks to vote bank politics. And you still have a large section of backward sections in our country. So the writer is urging the citizens, the government, to adopt a multi-pronged approach to overcome the caste barriers in the nation. Right? That's when a nation can become an egalitarian society. That's when a nation can be truly progressed and civilized. You are in no way civilized when you are discriminating on the lines of caste and subjecting people to such inhuman treatment. This is about basic human rights and human principles. So that is what we take away from this important article. And please take up this practice question. From assaults in rural areas for defying caste norms to urban discrimination in housing and employment, caste continues to deny citizens dignity and opportunity. Critically examine. So please answer this question and let me know what are your thoughts on this sensitive and controversial topic. Please let me know in the comments. So let's move on to the next article, the third topic, another interesting article written by an IRAS officer from the Indian Railways account service. So based on his professional personal experience, the IRAS officer is talking about the plan of the Indian Railways, the ambitious plan of the Indian Railways to decarbonize the railway infrastructure and the railway network in the country. The Indian Railways, please make a note. This is very, very important, even for prelims. Indian Railways has set an ambitious goal of 2030 to achieve net zero emissions, to bring down its carbon footprint, and to decarbonize the entire railway infrastructure in the country, to move away from fossil fuels and greenhouse gas emissions and adopt cleaner technologies, to achieve net zero status by 2030. This is 40 years before the target that India has set for itself. Under the Paris Agreement, India has adopted the net zero goal for 2070. As a nation, India is set to achieve net zero target by 2070. But the railways has set an ambitious goal for itself to achieve net zero status by 2030. For those of you who don't understand what's net zero emissions is a state where the quantum of emissions, right, is matched with the quantum of emissions being absorbed through carbon sinks and through carbon sequestration. So when you can achieve a balance between carbon emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions, and the greenhouse emissions which is being removed from the atmosphere, right? You reach a net zero state. Essentially, you'll not be contributing to any further uh, concentration of greenhouse gases and global warming. So Indian Railways has set out this ambitious goal and it is taking several steps. For example, recently, Indian Railways rolled out a hydrogen-based locomotive. The hydrogen-based propulsion is something that is being pioneered in the automotive industry. Even car makers are still struggling with such hybrid vehicles. But Indian Railways has already started pioneering the technology. Recently, it tested a hydrogen locomotive built by the Integral Coach Factory. Now, this is one of the first steps in the entire world when it comes to railway infrastructure where a hydrogen based locomotive has been tested out. Very few countries have this credit, and Indian Railways has been taking a big step in this regard. Now, according to this officer, Indian Railways has invested heavily in clean, renewable energy. I'm sure you must be familiar with the electrification of our railway tracks. Now, did you know 98% of the broad gauge network that we have has been electrified. Almost 45,000 kilometers of railway lines, broad gauge railway line has been electrified. Electric trains obviously contribute to less emissions compared to diesel steam engines. But however, where does this electricity come from? That is also a big question. If this electricity is coming from coal-based power plants, then it defeats the whole purpose. Then that is not true reduction of emissions. It's only a notional reduction, right? Electric trains, if they are powered by coal-based power plants, then there's no point because this is just a notional reduction of emissions. It's not genuine, real reduction of emissions. So Indian Railways is transitioning away from coal-based power and it is focusing on solar, wind, and other forms of clean renewable energy. And today it accounts for nearly 700 megawatts, which is powering the electrified train network of India. Now, why is this so important? What could be the impact of decarbonizing the Indian railways? See, please understand, the Indian railways is moving 24 million people per day. Every day, 24 million people are moving around using the railway network. More than 3 million tons of freight cargo is being moved by the Indian railways. So Indian railways is critical for India's transport, mobility, and connectivity. Millions of people depend on it. Large amount of goods are being transported through it. And railway transportation is considered to be much more efficient, even fuel efficient as compared to road transport. Now, if you can push more people towards rail-based transport and shift most of cargo freight transport towards railway-based transportation, it will reduce the stress on roads, bring down pollution and emissions even further. So it will have a very significant noticeable impact. So today the railways is making such investments. Even if you look at the railway stations, if you look at the offices and buildings that are present across the country, the railways is pushing them towards green standards. It is adopting the Shunya standards of the Bureau of Energy Efficiency. Today, thousands of railway stations and railway buildings and offices in the country are Shunya certified as per the standards of Bureau of Energy Efficiency, meaning they are climate friendly. They have adopted climate friendly design and they are essentially net zero when it comes to their carbon footprint. At all these large parcels of land owned by railways, large buildings and stations, solar capacity has been installed. Today, several railway stations and buildings and offices are powered entirely by solar power. So these are significant investments which are going in to the decarbonization of the railway infrastructure in our country. In fact, Indian Railways, it wants to push up the electrification project, ensure 100% electrification of the entire network, and focus on clean, renewable sources of energy to power the trains and as well as the railway stations and the offices and buildings. Now, if this dream is achieved, almost 60 million tons of CO2 emissions can be brought down every year. This will be the reduction in emissions. This will significantly help India to achieve its climate action targets under the Paris Agreement. 60 million ton reduction in CO2 emissions per year. Now, the challenge is funding, the finance part of it. Because making such investments in hydrogen locomotives, electric locomotives, clean renewable energy, so making this transition is quite costly, quite expensive. So how is the railway mobilizing the funds, the finances? See, the government has rolled out the sovereign green bonds with the RBI, and this has mobilized significant capital, and 42,000 crores has been allocated by the government for the electrification of railway locomotives. So significant capital expenditure is being provided by the government. Then we have the Indian Railway Finance Corporation, which has been issuing its own green bonds to raise capital from the markets to push for electrification and the installation of clean renewable projects. The railways is also raising loans from the World Bank For example, recently the World Bank has approved a $245 million loan for railway logistics project to help in the electrification of the railway infrastructure. So through this transformation, eventually the railways wants to shift the transportation of people and goods from roads to railway lines because it's more efficient, more environment friendly. If the plans are implemented as per the design, as per the goal, in another 5 years, 13 million vehicles can be taken off road because of the shift towards railway based transportation. So, this is the green transition of the Indian railways, the decarbonisation which is underway. Now, coming to the next article, the Gaza Peace Plan has been signed between all the stakeholders, and phase 1 of Gaza Peace Plan has come into effect. The Gaza Peace Plan, which was worked out by United States, Egypt, and Qatar, which acted as the mediators between Israel and Hamas, has come into full effect. Yesterday, the Gaza Peace Summit was held at Sharm el Sheikh in Egypt. By then, Israel Hamas had already committed to the peace plan, and they even started the phase 1, under which Hamas has released all the alive hostages, around 20 hostages who were still alive. They have all been released by Hamas, and in return, Israel has released 1,900 Palestinian prisoners who were in Israeli custody. This has brought a ceasefire into effect in Gaza, bringing much needed relief to the people on both sides, right? Especially for the Palestinians who have suffered at the hands of Israel's disproportionate use of force, and even Israelis who have suffered because of the conflict, because of the terror attack that Hamas carried out on October 7th. It's a huge sigh of relief as it can possibly bring some normalcy to the region and pave the way for reconstruction and rehabilitation efforts. So, US, Egypt, and Qatar, which have acted as mediators, they have also signed the peace plan as the guarantors of the peace pact. So now we have to wait and watch whether all sides will uphold their commitments. Will Hamas dismantle? Because one of the conditions under Gaza peace plan is for Hamas to be disarmed and Gaza to become terror free, a radical terror free zone. So will Hamas really disarm itself and surrender? This is a big question. Hamas has refused to do that. Then the other big question is, will Israel completely withdraw from Gaza? As of now, Israel has partially withdrawn. But will Israel really quit Gaza and allow Palestinian territories to be governed by Palestinians, by the legitimate Palestinian Authority? These are unanswered questions, but at least for now, there is a temporary relief as a ceasefire has taken effect and phase 1 of the plan has been implemented. This plan has been widely welcomed by all the world leaders, including by India. So that's one update regarding the Gaza war. Next, the Nobel Prize for Economics has been announced. The Nobel Prize for Economics is also referred to as the Riksbank Prize. That's the formal name for the Nobel Prize in Economics. It has been awarded to 3 top economists, one from United States, one from France, one from Britain. So, Joel Mokyr, Philip Aghion, Peter Howitt. These 3 world-renowned economists have been awarded this year's Nobel Prize in Economics. Please remember the names and what is the work for which they have been recognized. These economists came out with studies and research to establish the role of innovation in driving economic growth. They established that it is scientific innovation, technological development, which champions economic growth. Now, you might say, what's so big about this? Even you and me can argue that innovation is what will drive growth, right? But we are not given Nobel Prize in economics. Why? Because these researchers have established with data and clearly brought out the trends throughout human history to establish the link between innovation, technological development, and economic growth. It's not just about postulating. It's not just about making a statement. It's about backing it up with research, with data. That's what these economists have done. Because see, look at human history. Since ancient prehistoric times till now, in most periods, economic growth has been stagnant. For centuries, sometimes there would be no growth at all. But once there is a new innovation, a new technological development, there would be an exponential growth curve. Take, for example, the discovery of fire, the development of the first wheels, development of steam and steam engines, steam powered manufacturing. These small innovations, one by one, would transform human development and global economic growth. So they have established this link. They've clearly pointed out the relation between innovation, technological development, and research with economic growth and development. And it's in recognition of this work that the Nobel in economics has been awarded to these three economists. Next, Gen Z protests, which has been spreading like wildfire across the world, has claimed another government. First, it was Nepal, right? A few weeks ago, the government in Nepal was toppled by the angry youth who were frustrated with the lack of opportunities and development and the corruption. And they took to the streets in violent protests fueled by social media, fueled by platforms like TikTok, Facebook, WhatsApp, and the others, organizing themselves, holding these rallies and violent protests. And eventually, they toppled the government in Nepal. It became a successful violent revolution. Similar Gen Z protests have been seen worldwide. It's like the Arab Spring movement, which was seen between 2010 and 2011 in the Middle East, North Africa region. In 2010, 2011, in the Middle East, North Africa region, in countries like Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, and many others, we saw such successive revolutionary movements fueled by social media, where civilians were organizing themselves to oppose dictatorships, to oppose authoritarianism and government corruption. And they even successfully toppled few dictators. Like, for example, Hosni Mubarak of Egypt was toppled. The Tunisian president was toppled. And this idea went viral and spread across the region, affecting multiple countries from Morocco to Bahrain to Qatar to Yemen. Multiple nations were affected by the Arab Spring movement. Correct? So something similar is being witnessed today, and it's being labeled as Gen Z protests because the protesters are primarily the youth, especially those who are in the age group of 18 to 25 years or even below the age of 20 years. So it's not just Nepal. Such Gen Z protests have been seen in Indonesia. Even these were anti corruption protests, anti elite, anti privileged protests. Same protests were seen in Kenya. Similar protests were witnessed in Morocco. Similar protests have been seen in the Philippines. And it has claimed another government in the Indian Ocean, in Africa, that is Madagascar. In Madagascar, the president, Andry Rajoelina, was facing weeks of protests by the people who were frustrated by the youth. They were calling for his resignation. He has eventually fled the country. Because see, in Madagascar, Madagascar, by the way, is a former French colony, if you know, former French colony, and the world's number one producer of vanilla. Almost 80% of global vanilla supply comes from this country, Madagascar, which is an African country in the western part of Indian Ocean. It occupies a strategic location. Now, in Madagascar, if you look at the demographic profile, the median age of the country is less than 20 years. The country has a population of around 30 million, if I'm not wrong, around 3 crore approximately. And majority of the country's population are the young age population, especially the Gen Z. The median age itself is less than 20 years. But there is rampant poverty. There is lack of essentials like water and power. In fact, this became the trigger for the protests. The president, Andry Rajoelina, he came to power in 2009 through a coup which was supported by a military unit. There is an elite military unit in Madagascar which supported this president. Andry Rajoelina in 2009, they toppled the then government through a coup attempt. They threw out the government and captured power. So since then, President Andry Rajoelina has ruled the country, and the people are frustrated that there has been no growth, no development, no jobs, no opportunities. Education has been neglected. There is rampant corruption, very high poverty levels, and recently there was a big shortage of water and power supply, which became the trigger for the Gen Z protests, which was mainly organized through social media. Finally, some military units also aligned with the protesters. They abandoned the president, they sided with protesters, and essentially issued an ultimatum to the president to step down. So once the military also turned against the government and turned towards the protesters, the president had no other choice. So according to reports, he has fled the country. Most likely, France has evacuated him because France has always maintained close ties with its former colonies. With the help of the French intelligence, most likely the controversial president of Madagascar has been airlifted and evacuated from the country. So another government has fallen because of Gen Z protests. After Nepal, Madagascar is the second successful revolution. Is that clear? Now, why are we discussing this? How is it even relevant for our exams? See, first of all, Gen Z protests can be an important topic. Previously, we have seen questions on the Arab Spring movement. Arab Spring movement led to many other consequences, which even affects the Middle East region, North Africa region even today. So Gen Z protests could reshape the world itself. It has that potential. It shows that the youth are frustrated around the world, especially when governments don't focus on development, when governments are corrupt, when the rich are enriching themselves, and they don't care about the poor people, when they don't provide for any growth and welfare and development. This is going to be the end result. Because today, with the power of social media and the power of internet, it's very easy for people to mobilize, to organize quickly, and lead these large scale protests. Now, this is very, very relevant for India from a geopolitical point of view as well, because Madagascar is an important strategic and security partner for India. It's located in the Western Indian Ocean. You can see here it's part of the East Africa region. And this is where the Mozambique Channel is present, which is a maritime choke point. It's an important shipping route for ships coming from Europe that circumnavigate across the Cape of Good Hope, across Africa. They pass through Mozambique Channel to reach Arabian Sea and the Indian coastline, especially since the Red Sea route has become risky because of the Houthi attacks and because of Somalian piracy near Gulf of Aden. This is still a viable shipping route. And Mozambique Channel is a vital maritime shipping route. And India has direct security interests present here. India is interested to counter piracy, to counter organized crime and terrorism, which is prevalent in East Africa and the Indian Ocean. And we are interested to counter China. In fact, India has very close defense relations with Madagascar. We have very close cultural, civilizational ties. From decades, Gujarati traders, money lenders, merchants have traveled and settled in East Africa. So there is a strong Indian community in Madagascar. There are close to 20,000 members in the Indian diaspora community, and thousands of them are still Indian citizens. Right? So there is a strong Indian connect, a Gujarati connection through money lenders and merchants and traders. Plus, India has built close defense relations. India has set up a coastal surveillance radar in Madagascar to carry out maritime surveillance in the Indian Ocean. India maintains a coastal surveillance radar network, which allows us to develop maritime intelligence to monitor the movement of vessels all across the Indian Ocean. And all that radar data is fed into the headquarters at Gurugram, the IFC IOR, Information Fusion Center for Indian Ocean region, where all the naval intelligence is collated. So it's become one of the leading maritime intelligence centers of India. And we have a network of coastal radars all across the coastline of India, from Gujarat to West Bengal, covering our islands as well, Lakshadweep and Andaman. And these radars are set up in friendly countries like Mauritius, Seychelles, which we discussed yesterday, and as well as in Madagascar. India has a coastal radar station, and Indian Navy frequently keeps visiting Madagascar. We help the country in protecting and carrying out surveillance and patrolling in their exclusive economic zone. We provide them with military training. We conduct military exercises with Madagascar. Clear? When the country is hit by disasters, India provides disaster management assistance. For example, in 2020, Madagascar was hit by a deadly cyclone, Cyclone Diane, and India launched Operation Vanilla. It was aptly named because Madagascar is the world's largest vanilla producer. So, under Operation Vanilla, Indian Navy dispatched relief material and assistance material to help the country cope with the impact of the cyclone and the floods. So, India has always been a key partner for this country. So, any political change here will upset India's calculations. Under the Sagar Mahasagar doctrine, India has cemented these strategic defense, economic, and cultural ties to counter China and to protect our security and defense interests. So these sudden developments and revolutions and toppling of governments, it is a matter of concern for India. This could upset India's policy towards the Indian Ocean region. Now, coming to the prelim section, let's take a quick look and wrap up the session for today. On page 1, there is an update on retail inflation. Retail inflation is on a downward spiral. It has hit a 8-year low for the month of September 2025. Retail inflation of 1.54% has been recorded. That is the consumer price index, which is captured by the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, shows a significant drop, and this is one of the lowest in the last 8 years. Back in 2017, CPI inflation had reached around 1.4%. So after that, this is the lowest. So it's a historic low, and it has been dropping for the past few months. The reason why inflation is declining is because fuel and food prices have been going down. Because of a good monsoon, food prices have been going down. There is adequate supply in the market. Fuel prices have remained stable because of stable global oil prices as well. And you see the impact directly on inflation numbers. Now, this is way below the target given to the Monetary Policy Committee of the RBI. The Monetary Policy Committee is supposed to maintain an inflation of 4% with a margin of plus or minus 2%. Meaning, lowest inflation should be 2%, highest should be 6%. This is the inflation range, the target range given to the Monetary Policy Committee of the RBI. So persistent inflation below 2% indeed raises challenges, macroeconomic challenges. So this could probably lead the RBI, the Monetary Policy Committee, to step in the coming months and use the monetary policy tools to bring inflation back to the range of 2 to 4%, which is considered to be more ideal for growth. Next, the Principal Secretary to the Prime Minister, P.K. Mishra, has participated in a G20 ministerial meeting in Durban in South Africa on disaster management and disaster resilience and disaster risk reduction. At this meeting, the Principal Secretary to PM Modi has highlighted the role of early warning systems. He has pointed out early warning forecasting systems are strategic investments because they provide you timely alerts, real-time information on impending disasters so you can evacuate the people and take appropriate measures in order to minimize the loss of lives and loss to the infrastructure and the economic assets. So, in this speech, the Principal Secretary has referred to a global framework, and I want you to make a note of this. The Principal Secretary has referred to this global initiative known as E4W All, Early Warning for All initiative. What is this Early Warning for All initiative? It's a global framework which was launched by United Nations in 2022. Please make a note of the facts. These are very vague and miscellaneous topics. It's never easy to cover them. Best way to cover them is through newspapers. In 2022, the UN launched this initiative to provide early warning and timely forecast and alerts to all the countries to deal with the impact of disasters, to improve disaster resilience and to provide for disaster risk reduction. So this is a global framework. EW for All, Early Warning for All initiative. There are 4 major pillars under it. Disaster risk knowledge. To develop disaster risk knowledge. This initiative is led by the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. So different global organizations are leading each of the pillars. Disaster risk knowledge is led by the UN Office on Disaster Risk Reduction. Detection, observation, monitoring, analysis, and forecast, which includes meteorological analysis, tracking extreme weather events like cyclones, etc. This is led by the World Meteorological Organization, which is also part of the UN family. Then disseminating the warning and alerts and communicating the real time alerts. This is led by the International Telecommunication Union, which is also part of the UN system. Finally, preparedness and response to help the affected population during disasters. It is led by global humanitarian organizations such as the International Federation of Red Cross and the Red Crescent societies. They basically carry out the relief work in disaster hit areas. So these four global institutions are leading these four pillars of early warning for all initiative. Next article on page 12. There's an article referring to Pradhan Mantri Surya Ghar Yojana. This was an ambitious scheme launched by the Modi government, announced in the 2024-25 budget. The goal of this Yojana, this government scheme, is to incentivize the installation of solar rooftops in 1 crore households so that free electricity, muft bijli, can be provided up to 300 units per month and promote the adoption of solar energy at the household level. It's a very ambitious scheme launched by the government, and the government provides incentive for installation of solar rooftops only if the components and equipment is manufactured in India. So there are certain conditions to be met, right? If the solar essential components which are being installed on the rooftop of a house, if the components are entirely manufactured in India, if it's indigenous, only then the beneficiaries are eligible. The target was to reach 1 crore households. But however, the scheme has been failing. The scheme has turned out to be a flop. Only 13.1% of the applications have been approved because there is a problem in the approval of the applications. There have been long delays. There are administrative bottlenecks in clearing these applications and files. So as a result, the scheme is not living up to the expectation. That is what the article is telling us. So please know the objectives of the scheme. When was it launched? These basic facts are essential for prelims. Next, there's an article on page 12 that provides some important demographic data of India based on Vital Statistics of India report. The Vital Statistics of India report is compiled by the Registrar General of India under the Ministry of Home Affairs, which also conducts the census. So based on the civil registration system data, the Registrar General compiles the Vital Statistics of India report. You know, in the civil registration system, the birth and death rates are captured. That's the primary purpose of the civil registration system. When a new kid is born, there is a mandatory legal requirement to register the birth and get a birth certificate within 21 days of the birth. Similarly, when a person passes away, there is a mandatory legal requirement to get a death certificate so that all the births and deaths can be accounted. And this is maintained under the civil registration system by your local authorities. This is regulated as per the provisions laid down by the Home Ministry. So using this birth and death data, the Home Ministry under the Registrar General compiles the Vital Statistics of India. Now, what are the key takeaways from this report? Please make a note. The number of births has declined slightly. In 2022, there were slightly more births as compared to 2023. This data is for 2023. In the year 2023, India recorded 2.52 crore new births. This is a slight reduction as compared to 2022 birth data. It's around 2.3 lakhs lesser. So 2.3 lakh fewer children were born in 2023 as compared to 2022. So this points towards a slight drop in our birth numbers. The death numbers have gone up slightly. 86.6 lakh deaths have been reported in 2023 compared to 86.5 lakh in 2022. Just a slight marginal increase. During the COVID years, there was a huge jump in unaccounted deaths, especially 2020 and 2021. Almost 21 lakh deaths have been accounted, marking a big spike just because of pandemic related causes. This slightly declined in 2022-2023. This trend also has been captured by the Vital Statistics of India report. But the most important finding of the report is related to sex birth ratio. I want all of you to make a note of this parameter. Sex birth ratio, SBR. What is it? Sex birth ratio measures the number of female births per thousand males that are born. Now, if you take 1,000 male kids that are born, compare that with the number of female births. That is your sex birth at ratio. And Arunachal Pradesh has recorded the highest sex birth ratio in the country, followed by Nagaland, Goa, Tripura, and Ladakh. These are the top 5 states or union territories in the country with regard to the best sex birth ratio, meaning they have a very healthy number of females compared to 1,000 males. But the alarming states, they include Jharkhand with the worst sex birth ratio, just 899 female births per 1,000 male births. From 2022 to 2022, for 3 consecutive years, it was Bihar which had the worst sex birth ratio. Now, Jharkhand has beaten Bihar to hold this infamous title. After Jharkhand, the worst sex birth ratio is seen in Bihar, followed by Telangana, Maharashtra, and Gujarat. And this is quite alarming. Is that clear? Next, the Syrian Democratic Forces are in the news. The SDF, which is a Kurdish militant force. The Syrian Democratic Forces represent the Kurdish community that operate in northeastern part of Syria. Look at the map of Syria here. You can see this yellow shaded region in the northeastern part of Syria, where you have cities like Raqqa, Kobane, and the others. You might have heard of these cities as well, because this previously was the stronghold of Islamic State, the ISIS, when ISIS was rearing its head in Iraq and Syria in 2014, 2015. It was this region that ISIS dominated back then. Eventually, ISIS was driven out and kicked out of this region, defeated territorially, mainly because the Kurdish forces which operate here, the Kurdish militia, they worked for the United States. The US sponsored them. The CIA sponsored the Kurdish militia, and US targeted ISIS with Russia. Russia carried out major airstrikes and covert intelligence operations, whereas US conducted its own special force operations and drone operations. So these operations of Russia and US, with the backing of the Kurdish militia, the Syrian Democratic Forces, helped in defeating Islamic State territorially and wiping out the territorial control of ISIS in northeast Syria. So after the defeat of ISIS, the Syrian Democratic Forces that represent the Kurdish community, they had struck a deal with the former Syrian government under President Bashar al-Assad. The Kurdish areas had been given some autonomy by the Assad government. Since the Kurds had helped in defeating ISIS, which was a threat for the Assad regime, Assad had granted autonomy to this Kurdish area controlled by the Syrian Democratic Forces and other Kurdish militias. But recently, a radical organization known as HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which previously was affiliated with Al-Qaeda and ISIS, has ran over the country, toppled the Assad government, and the leader of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, Muhammad al-Julani, has become the president of Syria. He goes by the name Ahmad al-Shura. So as Syria is being reconstituted, the current Syrian regime has struck a deal with the Kurdish militants, with the Syrian Democratic Forces. The Syrian Democratic Forces and Kurdish militia will now be integrated into the regular army and security forces of the new Syrian government. Is that clear? Previously, there was a fear that the new regime under HTS would target the Kurdish minorities, and there was a fear that SDF might be wiped out. But they have struck a deal, and Syrian Democratic Forces and other Kurdish militant groups, they are going to join the new Syrian army and the internal security forces, which are being set up under the new Syrian regime. Coming to the last two topics, both related to environment and ecology. On the supplement page of the Science and Tech section, the Hindu publishes a very important article related to IUCN and the red list of IUCN. The IUCN red list has been updated, and Arctic seals have been listed as endangered species. Please make a note, it's very important. I'll tell you why IUCN is in the news. We'll come to that point. But Arctic seals, they face a considerable threat because of human activities and global warming. There are different subspecies of Arctic seals. The hooded seal has been shifted from vulnerable to endangered because of the growing threat and declining population. The bearded Arctic seal and the harp seals are now classified as near threatened on the red list, the red data book of the IUCN. Several bird species also have been brought into the red list under the threatened species. Right now, on the red list, we have more than 1,72,000 species, of which 48,000 are threatened with the risk of extinction. Birds, especially in the tropical belt in Africa, they are facing increased risk. And Arctic seals, especially, they are facing an increased threat. And if their population is threatened or wiped out, this could disrupt the food chain in the marine ecosystem, particularly in the polar belts, in the polar areas. Because Arctic seals are a keystone species. They basically hold the food chain together. They consume the smaller fish. They help in recycling nutrients. They act as food, as prey for the larger predators in the polar waters. So, if the Arctic seals were to go extinct, it could probably collapse the whole marine ecosystem and the food chain in the polar belt. So, this is a serious concern highlighted by the IUCN, as Arctic seals are now listed as endangered. Then, coming to the birds, several bird species from the tropical belt from Africa have been added to the list. Today, 61% of bird species have a declining population, according to IUCN. This is a significant jump. In 2016, 44% of bird species were seeing a declining population. Now, this has increased to 61%. But there is one good news. The green turtle, the green turtle, which was an endangered marine organism, has now been removed from the list. It is no longer listed as endangered because conservation efforts have led to increase in its population since 1970s. Green turtles were threatened by shipping and hunting and poaching and marine pollution, but conservation efforts have improved its population since the last 50 years, so it is no longer listed as endangered. Now, what is IUCN? The International Union for Conservation of Nature. It was established in 1948 to focus on biodiversity conservation, protection of various species of flora and fauna. It maintains a list of threatened species known as the Red List, also known as the Red Data Book. It's headquartered at Gland in Switzerland. And the Red List contains a list of threatened species, which are ranked according to the threat levels, right? So please find out which are the different levels of threatened species present in the red list, and please mention those different uh, designations. You have extinct, extinct in the wild, endangered, vulnerable, near threatened, etc. So please find out all the classifications within the red list. Can you please mention that in the comments? Now, the reason why IUCN is in news is because currently the World Conservation Congress of IUCN is taking place in Abu Dhabi. As we speak, from 9th to 14th October, the IUCN World Conservation Congress is taking place, where countries are coming together to discuss about biodiversity conservation. Coming to the last article, it's related to the snow leopard. The snow leopards are very elusive, very shy creatures. They are found primarily in the high altitude alpine Himalayan belt. They're found in Afghanistan, Pakistan, in the Hindu Kush mountain range, found across the Himalayas in India, Nepal, Bhutan, stretching into Myanmar, found in Tibet and China. So they are very restricted in terms of their range. Their population is very limited. It's very hard to spot a snow leopard in the wild. This magnificent species, they have managed to survive and thrive despite their limited genetic diversity. A new research has confirmed that snow leopards have very limited genetic diversity. See, the species is vulnerable, listed as a threatened species on the IUCN Red List. It does face a risk of extinction. That's primarily because their numbers are less. They are distributed in a very small region. And studies have shown that their genetic diversity is very, very less amongst all the big cats. To take all the big cats in the world, tigers, lions, etc., all the nine big cats, snow leopard displays the lowest genetic diversity. What's the reason behind this? The reason why they have very low genetic diversity is because their population size is very limited. So there is a possibility of inbreeding. Within the related population, inbreeding will take place. When the population size of the species is very less, they're restricted to a small region. So this limits the genetic diversity, thus increases the threat, the vulnerability of the species. But however, nature is amazing. These animals, they have a natural counter to it, right? This again shows natural selection at work. You know what happens when, let's say, a snow leopard with a defective gene is born, or with some sort of weakness or vulnerability is born? These snow leopards usually do not procreate, meaning they usually pass away before they reach the reproductive age. They don't even live a full life, so that they don't reproduce, they don't produce defective offsprings. This is natural selection at work, where nature eliminates the weaker runts amongst the litter. If at all, let's say a few pups are born with some defects or genetic comorbidities, so such species or such individuals, essentially, they don't reach adulthood, they don't procreate, they don't reproduce, thus ending the defectiveness at that level itself without allowing it to be passed on down the generation. So despite the low genetic diversity, the species has thrived and survived. So today they are threatened, listed as vulnerable on the IUCN Red List. So this brings my detailed discussion to an end. I hope you guys have understood all the topics. If you like the session, do let me know by pressing the like button, share your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. That's it. Thanks for watching.